Monopoly. One of the most famous board games ever made. A game about winning, getting rich, and bankrupting your opponent. How the game came to be? Well, it's a story of rags to riches. Invented by a struggling salesman during the Great Depression who turned it into $1 million success.
We're in the money.
At least that's the story I was told. But actually, it was this woman who invented the game. And it wasn't designed to celebrate wealth. It was designed to warn against it. So how did the message of the game get flipped? And how did Lizzie Magie lose credit for the game she so cleverly created, even though she had a patent? This is the story of the game you know, and the woman history forgot. Hey, quick pause. I'm Michelle Logan, a former news reporter.
And I'm Caitlin Colmo, author of To Her Credit.
And together we're producing Actually History to celebrate the women who shaped our world, but didn't get the credit.
If you care about these stories, like and subscribe.
Our story starts in the Gilded Age. This was the late 1800s, a period marked by rapid industrialization, the rise of corporate monopolies, and a widening gap between the rich and working class. Enter Henry George. And his ideas were controversial enough to spark national headlines, kind of like the Bernie Sanders of the 1800s. In his 1879 bestseller, Progress and Poverty, George argued that people should keep all that they earn, and that the government should be funded by a single tax on real estate owners, since land rightly belonged to everyone. George believed a society funded by this single tax would eliminate lower-class poverty. Our leading lady, Lizzie Magie, grew up absorbing those ideas. She was born in 1866 in Illinois. Her father, James Magie, was a newspaper publisher and an outspoken supporter of Henry George's ideas. Lizzie cared so much about the economic disparity the country was facing, she joined a growing movement of people trying to spread George's ideology. But she understood something many economists didn't. Most people aren't gonna sit down and read a dense treatise on land tax reform. So she had an idea. What if you could experience the problem instead? In 1904, Lizzie filed a patent for a board game. She called it the Landlord's game. Not exactly a catchy title, but then again, she wasn't trying to sell toys. She was trying to start a conversation. So if Lizzie invented the game in 1904, how did Charles Darrow, an out-of-work salesman, end up making millions from the same game in the 1930s? The answer begins with the Landlord's game's original set of rules, and how half the game, along with its intended lesson, got lost along the way. Like the game you know today, in Lizzie's game, players bought property, collected rent, and tried to build wealth. But her game was different from the game we know today in one major way. It had two different sets of rules, and players could choose which version of the game to play each time. The monopolist rules and the prosperity rules. The prosperity rules rewarded cooperation. Wealth was shared, progress was collective, and everyone benefited from each other's successes. The other looked a lot more familiar. The monopolist rules encouraged players to acquire as much property as possible, charge rent, and bankrupt their opponents.
And that's Monopoly.
Whichever way you played, Lizzie Magie hoped that players would think about the true nature of capitalist society. Yes, more. The game was not a blockbuster hit, but it did spread. Not through stores, but through people. College campuses, Quaker communities, even a rendition in England. And most importantly, for this story, players created homemade sets, tweaking street names and passing it along. By the 1930s, homemade versions were circulating across the country, which is why things start to get complicated. By the height of the decade-long Great Depression, nearly 1 in 4 Americans was unemployed. Thousands of banks had failed, and families across the country lined up daily for food and relief. Among those out of work was a man named Charles Darrow, who was previously employed as a heating salesman in Pennsylvania. And like many people at the time, at some point, he was introduced to the familiar property trading game. But Darrow saw something more to the board game than just a fun time with friends. He saw a business opportunity. He refined the design, added color and illustrations, and most importantly, he eliminated the prosperity rules entirely. The only goal of his game was to bankrupt your opponents. Darrow began selling his version of the game under a new name, Monopoly. At first, it was a DIY operation, handmade games sold locally. But demand grew quickly. So he approached one of the biggest board game companies in America, Parker Brothers. At first, Parker Brothers rejected his game. Internal evaluations reportedly listed dozens of fundamental errors. The game was too long, too complex, too messy. But Darrow kept selling it anyway, and the game started flying off shelves in Philadelphia department stores. Parker Brothers noticed. So Parker Brothers changed their mind, and the company bought the game from him and began selling it nationwide. To market the product, they told a story. A struggling salesman invents a board game and becomes a millionaire overnight. It was irresistible. Perfect success story. The public loved it. During one of the toughest decades in history for the everyday man, Parker Brothers was selling the American dream in a box. There was just one problem. It was a lie. Looking to squash potential competition and establish a monopoly on the game Monopoly, Parker Brothers began to acquire their competition. So in 1935, Magie sold the rights to the Landlord's game to Parker Brothers for a flat fee of $500, which is about $11,000 today. The company also agreed to publish 2 of her other board games, King's Men, a tile matching game, and Bargain Day, a shopping game. But Magie received no royalties for the Landlord's game. No ongoing credit, just a one-time payment for the game that we all know. According to reporting later published in the New York Times and research by author of The Monopolists, Mary Pylon, Magie agreed to the sale, believing her educational message might still reach a wider audience by doing so. She wrote a letter to Parker Brothers after the acquisition was finalized. "Farewell, my beloved brainchild. I regretfully part with you, but I am giving you to another who will be able to do more for you than I have done." Till the end, she cared more about spreading her ideas than she did about making money. Meanwhile, Charles Darrow's deal with Parker Brothers looked very different. He received royalties on every copy sold. And as Monopoly became a national and then global phenomenon, those small payments turned into millions. And the marketable story of who invented the game stuck. Darrow, forevermore, became the inventor. Magie became a footnote. For decades, the official history of the board game credited one man, but the truth is more complicated. Lizzie Magie's contribution to American culture and game design were lost to history until the 1970s, when a man named Ralph Anspich, embroiled in a legal battle with Parker Brothers, discovered her patent. Magie died in 1948. She was 81 years old, but she lived long enough to see the enduring success of her invention, even if her name was erased and her economic lesson lost. Magie designed the game as a warning, to show how monopolies concentrate power, how systems can be rigged, and how one player's success can come at everyone else's expense. And in the end, that lesson may have played out more clearly off the board than on it. Thank you, Lizzie Magie, for turning an idea about fairness into one of the most famous games in history. And thank you for sharing your ideas in a way that would captivate the world. Here at Actually History, we're seeing history through a new lens and giving credit where it's actually due. Most of our stories are based on this book, and she co-wrote it. We kindly ask, if you're interested in our mission, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. More stories to come. Class is in session.